Hello, my dear friends. Can you smell the rain just after it's fallen on a forest floor? That deep, rich scent of damp earth, wet leaves, and ancient soil. That is the scent of our story tonight. We are travelling back to the middle of the 19th century to the promise of a new life in New Zealand, a place sold to the hopeful and the desperate as a paradise on earth, a Britain of the South. The posters showed rolling green hills, dotted with fluffy sheep, a land of milk and honey just waiting for you. But here's the thing about beautifully printed brochures. They lie. The truth is, the gentle English garden they promised was, in reality, a primeval, alien wilderness that had never been tamed, and you probably wouldn't survive the attempt to do so. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a small thing, but it helps our sleepy community grow. Now, find that perfect spot. Imagine yourself on the deck of a tall ship, after months at sea, finally smelling land on the wind. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The journey has been an eternity of creaking wood, the taste of salt, and the monotonous grey blue of the sea. For 6 months, you have lived in a cramped, swaying world, your only anchor to the future clutched in a small wooden box, a handful of letters from home and a brightly coloured pamphlet from the New Zealand company. You know its every crease and smudge by heart. The cover depicts a landscape so perfect, so utterly familiar, it feels like a memory of a home you've never had. It's a vision of Kent, or perhaps Devonshire. Gentle, rolling hills of the most pleasant green imaginable sweep down to a calm, sparkling sea. A few tidy sheep graze peacefully. In the middle distance, a charming stone cottage sits nestled in a copse of trees, a friendly curl of white smoke rising from its chimney. The sky is a serene, benevolent blue. This is the promise. This is the reason you endured the storms, the sickness, the sheer, crushing boredom of the voyage. You are not an adventurer, not a conqueror. You are a farmer, a son of the soil, and this pamphlet has promised you a piece of English soil, just better. More fertile, more affordable, more full of opportunity. A blank slate on which to write a better life. And now, after all this time, land is here. You scramble on deck with the others, a current of excitement buzzing through the weary passengers. You lean on the rail, knuckles white, and you stare. But the land that greets you bears no resemblance to the one in your hand. There are no rolling, gentle hills. Instead, a colossal, dark green wall rises almost vertically from the shoreline. It is the bush. A dense, tangled, and utterly unbroken mass of forest, unlike anything you have ever conceived. The trees are not the familiar oak and ash and elm of home. They are strange, monstrous things with dark, leathery leaves and bark that looks like peeling skin. Giant, uncoiling ferns as tall as a man crowd the undergrowth. The entire landscape is draped and choked with vines and creepers, knitting it all together into an impenetrable fortress. The colour is wrong, too. It is not the cheerful, light green of an English spring. It is a dark, heavy, almost black green that seems to swallow the light. It feels ancient, primeval, and deeply, deeply indifferent to your arrival. The ship drops anchor in the bay, and the air changes. The crisp, clean scent of the open ocean is replaced by something else. It is a smell you will come to know better than your own name, the central, defining scent of your new life. It is the smell of damp. And profound, pervasive, and overwhelming scent of wet earth, rotting leaves, moss-covered logs, and a million years of perpetual twilight under the forest canopy. It's the smell of decay, yes, but also of a ferocious, unending life. It clings to your clothes and hair, fills your lungs, and feels less like an aroma and more like a physical presence. This is the perfume of the land you were promised was a garden. The long boat takes you to shore. You have saved your best clothes for this moment, wanting to step onto your new life looking respectable, a person of substance. But there is no dock, no neat shingle beach. The boat runs aground in the shallows, and you must clamber over the side into the cold, murky water. Your first step on the promised land is not onto solid ground. You sink to your ankles in thick, grey, sucking mud. It clings to your polished boots, instantly ruining them. It splashes up onto the hem of your trousers, a cold, wet welcome. Look around at the small, ragged clearing that serves as the settlement, a scattering of crude huts made of logs and flax, smoke mingling with the low-hanging mist. The beautiful illusion of the pamphlet dissolves into the shocking reality of mud, damp, and a terrifyingly alien wilderness. Why the profound disconnect? Why this cruel bait and switch? Because the men who sold you this dream, men like Edward Gibbon Wakefield, were not selling land. They were selling an idea. Their goal was not merely to populate a new territory but to transplant a perfect, idealized slice of British society, complete with its class structures, its familiar landscapes and its agricultural rhythms. To do that, they needed to convince thousands of people like you respectable, hard-working, and desperate for a leg up to gamble everything. They couldn't sell you on a dangerous, unknown, and intimidating reality. Who would sail for 6 months to fight a wet, tangled jungle? No, they had to sell you a dream you already understood. They had to paint a picture of a better Britain, a place that was just like home, only empty and waiting. The pamphlets were not guides, they were works of fiction, masterpieces of marketing designed to paper over a terrifying truth. They knew the land was a wild, untamed entity. They just gambled that by the time you discovered the lie, it would be too late to turn back. You are here now, your boots full of mud, the smell of rot in your nostrils, staring at a forest that feels like a living wall. You look from the impenetrable tangle of green back down to the crisp deed in your hand, where a man in a far-off London office has drawn you a perfect, tidy rectangle, assuring you it's already there, just waiting for you to find it. That paper in your hand feels like the only sane thing in this entire world. It's a land grant, your deed, the legal document that proves you own a piece of this wild place. It is a masterpiece of calm, rational order. On the crisp, slightly yellowed paper, a surveyor has drawn your future with black ink and a steady hand. It is a perfect rectangle. 40 acres of promise, laid out with ruler straight lines and precise right angles. The measurements are noted in the corner in neat, flowing script. It looks so simple, so manageable. It's an object you can understand, a geometric shape from a schoolboy's slate. It's not a landscape, it's an answer. This neat little square is the glamorous illusion of control. In a world of bewildering chaos, this document whispers that everything is, in fact, under control, measured and accounted for. It feels solid, real, more real than the dripping, tangled mess that surrounds you. You could be holding a deed for a plot in London. It is that abstract, that clean. To find your property, you are given not a guide, but a set of compass bearings and a reference point, a single, marked tree at the edge of the settlement's clearing. From there, it is up to you. Set off, your compass in one hand, an axe in the other. The journey is only a mile, perhaps 2, but it takes you half a day. Every step is a battle. You are not walking on the land, you are fighting your way through it. Thick, rubbery vines, known as supplejack, snag your legs and clothes, tripping you, holding you back like grasping hands. You have to hack a path, the rhythmic thud of your axe sounding small and pathetic against the immense silence of the forest. The ground beneath your feet is a treacherous lie. What looks like solid earth gives way to a foot of mud. What looks like a patch of moss conceals a network of slick, ankle-twisting roots, and always, that smell. The deep, cloying perfume of damp rot, of a billion leaves composting in the perpetual twilight. It's the scent of the very ground you are walking on, a scent that promises fertility but delivers only struggle. Finally, guided by your compass and a great deal of luck, you find it. Wooden peg, split and weathered, driven into the ground, a surveyor's mark carved into its head. This is the corner of your dream. You stand here, breathing heavily, sweat mingling with the damp air, and you try to see your rectangle. You pull out the precious deed again and look from the neat lines on the paper to the world in front of you. The line that should be the northern boundary of your property, a straight, clean line on the map, vanishes immediately down a steep, muddy ravine. A small, brown stream, choked with fallen branches, runs along the bottom. The western boundary starts promisingly enough on level ground for about 20 paces before it hits a wall of flax and raupo reeds, indicating a swampy morass that shimmers with insect life. The far side of your rectangle is completely invisible, lost behind a ridge so choked with giant ferns and ancient, moss-covered trees that you can't even guess where it might be. This is the shocking reality. Your perfect, 2-dimensional square is a 3-dimensional nightmare of slopes, gullies, and impenetrable vegetation. It's as if the surveyor drew the map while floating in the air, without ever setting foot on the ground he was charting. And in a way, he did. You begin to pace out the one accessible boundary, and you stumble upon the first true challenge, a stump. It's the remains of a rimu tree, and its diameter is wider than you are tall. The wood is dense, and the roots spread out like colossal, buried claws, gripping the earth. This isn't something you can simply dig out. It's a geological feature. Hacking at it with your axe feels like trying to demolish a stone building with a teaspoon. You kick at the base of it, and a shower of rotten wood and crawling things, slaters, and fat white grub spills out. The ground here is not soil as you know it. It is a dense, fibrous mat of roots, centuries deep. When you manage to sink your spade into it, it doesn't come up with a shovelful of rich, dark earth. It comes up with a sodden, weeping clump of organic matter that smells like a freshly opened tomb. So why this colossal deception? Why draw a map that bears no relation to the land it represents? It was not born of individual malice, but of imperial arrogance and economic necessity. The system was the thing. The New Zealand Company and the colonial government had a vast territory to dispose of and an urgent need for the cash that selling it would generate. The solution was the grid. Surveyors were tasked not with understanding the landscape, but with imposing a rational, geometric order upon it. They would establish a baseline and then, using trigonometry and theodolites, project a grid of perfect squares and rectangles across the entire district. This grid was drawn onto a master map, back in a warm, dry office. Your gully, your swamp, your giant, immovable stumps, they didn't exist on that map. The map was the reality that mattered. It allowed land to be sold efficiently, in standardized parcels, to people thousands of miles away. It was a triumph of abstract reason over inconvenient topography. The surveyor who hammered in your corner peg likely did the bare minimum required: find the spot, mark it, and get out of the oppressive, damp bush as fast as possible. Your struggle to make his geometric fantasy a physical reality was not his concern. It was yours. You are standing on the edge of your impossible property, the useless map in one hand. The dream of ploughing neat furrows in your English-style field seems a lifetime away. That dream is a foolish luxury. The sun is beginning to sink, and the air grows colder. The dampness intensifies, seeping into your bones. The immediate, desperate need is not for a farm. It is for shelter, for a fire, for a dry place to lie down. Before you can conquer this land, you must first survive it. And that means clearing a small patch of this hostile vertical ground, not for a crop, but simply to have a place to build a hut that might, just might, keep the ceaseless, creeping damp at bay. The dream of your future home is so clear in your mind, a miniature version of the manor house you used to work near back in England. It's a quaint country cottage, a vision built from memory and hope. You picture walls of warm, honey-coloured stone or perhaps whitewashed cob, a thick thatched roof with gently sloping eaves, and a sturdy oak door. Inside, a large stone hearth would dominate one wall, a fire crackling merrily within. The windows would have small, diamond-shaped panes of glass, letting in the soft afternoon light. It would be a bastion of English civility and comfort, a testament to your success, a place of warmth and security against the wilderness. This is the glamorous illusion of domesticity, the very picture of the life you were promised. A little piece of the old country, lovingly recreated in the new. It's a powerful image, a beacon that guides your thoughts as you begin the monumental task of building your first home. The shocking reality begins with the sound of your axe. There is no dressed stone here, no seasoned oak beams to be had. Your only building material is the forest itself. You start by felling smaller tree spunga. The tree fern is a good choice. Its trunk is fibrous and soft, relatively easy to cut. You learn to notch them and watch them fall, the soft thud of their landing absorbed by the damp ground. Then you have to cut them into lengths and begin the back-breaking work of digging post holes. You don't have a post hole digger, just your spade. The ground fights you for every inch. Remember those tangled roots, that dense, fibrous mat? Hack and chop and dig, your hands quickly blistering, the raw skin stinging in the damp air. The framework of your new home is a series of uneven punga trunks, sunk into the mud. For the walls you split other logs, manuka and tatara, weaving supplejack vines between them to hold everything together, a technique borrowed from observing Mori ware. It's a rough, ugly lattice of mismatched wood. There is no thatch, no slate for the roof. You use what is at hand. You strip long pieces of bark from tatara trees, laying them in overlapping layers. Or perhaps you use the broad fronds of the Nicor palm, weaving them together. Whatever you use, it is not waterproof. The famous New Zealand rain, a persistent, fine drizzle that can last for days, finds every single crack and flaw. The constant, maddening dripping becomes the soundtrack to your life. To fill the gaps in the walls, you create a slurry of mud, moss, and chopped up flax leaves. You slap this daub onto the wooden frame with your bare hands. It cakes on your skin, under your fingernails. It never truly dries. The walls of your home are literally made of the wet, cold ground, and they feel like it. They feel clammy to the touch, and on especially wet days, they seem to weep. The centerpiece of your dream cottage was the grand fireplace. The reality is a gaping hole in the wall. You build a chimney out of more logs, plastered with the same mud and moss mixture. It is a terrifying fire hazard, and you live in constant, low-grade fear of the whole structure going up in flames. Worse, it doesn't draw properly. The hut is perpetually filled with a haze of acrid wood smoke. It stings your eyes, making them red and watery. It coats the inside of your lungs, giving you a hacking, persistent cough. Your clothes, your bedding, your hair, everything becomes imbued with the smell of smoke, which only partially masks that other constant smell, the inescapable underlying scent of damp. You look around your finished creation. It is not a cottage. It is a hut. A single, small, dark room. It has an earthen floor, which means the mud from outside is now the floor inside. It is smoky, leaky, and profoundly ugly. When you lie down at night on your bed, a pile of fern fronds and dry leaves on a raised wooden platform, you can hear things rustling in the walls. Insects, rats, maybe worse. You feel the cold damp seeping up from the ground, chilling you to the bone. This crude, miserable shelter is the shocking reality of your first home. Why was this acceptable? Why was the promise of a charming cottage so far removed from the leaky hovel you actually built? It boils down to a fundamental pioneer principle: triage. Your idyllic vision of a proper English house was a long-term goal, a someday project. The immediate, desperate need was for basic survival. The hierarchy of needs in the bush was brutal and simple. First, you needed shelter from the rain and wind. Comfort, not beauty, just a physical barrier between you and the elements. Any structure that could keep you from freezing to death in your sleep was a success. Second, you needed a fire for warmth, for cooking your meager food, and for drying your perpetually wet clothes. The fact that the fire filled your living space with choking smoke was a secondary problem. Being able to see was less important than not being dead. Every decision was a calculation of what was most likely to kill you first. Building a proper stone foundation. That would take months you didn't have before winter set in. Sourcing and milling quality timber. That required equipment, money, and time, none of which you possessed. The entire colonial project was built on the idea of making do. You were expected to be resourceful, to use what was at hand, and to endure hardship with grim determination. The refined comforts of the old world were a luxury to be earned, not a right to be expected. Your ugly, smoky, leaking hut was not a sign of failure. In the harsh logic of the bush, it was your first great victory. It was a toehold, a miserable but essential beachhead in your personal war against the wilderness. From this wretched starting point, all other things might, eventually, become possible. But first, you have to eat. In your daydreams, both on the long voyage and during the back-breaking work of building your hut, the thought of food was a constant comfort. You envisioned the farmer's feast, a trope as old as England itself. You imagined a long wooden table, perhaps rough-hewn but clean, groaning under the weight of abundance. The great roasted joint of beef or a succulent leg of pork would sit at the center, its skin crackling and brown. There would be bowls piled high with fluffy potatoes, roasted parsnips glistening with fat, and perhaps a savory pie with a golden crust. You imagined fresh-baked bread with a thick, chewy crust, and a wheel of sharp, crumbly cheese. In this fantasy, your farm provides. It's a vision of variety, of plenty, of the deep, satisfying reward for a hard day's work. This is the glamorous illusion of pastoral self-sufficiency, a life where the land offers up its bounty freely and generously. The shocking reality of your diet can be summarized in 3 words: mutton, potatoes, and tea. This triad becomes the monotonous, inescapable foundation of your entire existence. The first sheep you manage to buy are not for wool, not yet. They are for survival. You learn to butcher them yourself, a messy, bloody business that stains the ground and attracts flies. There is no ice, no cellar cool enough for proper aging. The meat must be eaten quickly or preserved. You eat fresh mutton for a day or 2, roasted on a stick over your smoky fire. The rest is salted. You rub coarse salt into the flesh and pack it into a barrel. This salted mutton becomes your staple protein. It is tough, stringy, and incredibly salty. You boil it for hours to try and make it palatable, to leach out some of the salt, but it remains a chore to eat, a test of dental fortitude. You will eat mutton, boiled, fried, or stewed in its own greasy broth day after day, week after week, until the thought of another sheep makes your stomach turn. Your first major agricultural success is not a field of golden wheat, but a small, lumpy patch of potatoes. They are a miracle crop. They grow in the poor, acidic soil you've managed to clear. They require minimal attention. They provide bulk, calories, something to fill your perpetually empty stomach. So you eat potatoes, oiled potatoes, mashed potatoes, made with a bit of mutton fat instead of the milk and butter you dream of. Sometimes, for a treat, you might fry leftover boiled potatoes in the pan, if you have enough precious fat to spare. They are your bread, your vegetable, your everything. Your meals become a simple, dreary calculation, a chunk of boiled, salty mutton and a pile of boiled potatoes. And then, there is the tea. Gallons of it. Drink it when you wake up, strong and black. You drink it with your midday meal. You drink it in the evening. It's brewed in a blackened tin billy that hangs permanently over the fire. The tea is strong, stewed, and incredibly sweet. Sugar is one of the few luxuries you can afford, a quick and easy source of energy. The hot, sweet liquid is a comfort, a ritual, a punctuation mark in the endless monotony of physical labor. It warms you from the inside out, and gives you the jolt of energy needed to go back out into the damp cold and swing the axe for a few more hours, but it offers no real nutrition. This unholy trinity salty, greasy mutton, bland, starchy potatoes, and sweet, black tea is not a feast. It's fuel. It's a diet that keeps you alive but leaves you with a constant, gnawing hunger for something fresh, something green, something with flavor. You might try to grow a few cabbages or onions, but they struggle in the sour soil and are often devoured by insects and pests you don't yet know how to combat. Foraging for native greens is a risky business for a newcomer who can't tell a nourishing plant from a poisonous one. So why this crushing culinary boredom? Why did the promise of agrarian abundance shrink to this meager, repetitive reality? It comes down to logistics and pioneer pragmatism. The glamorous feast you imagined was the product of a mature, diverse agricultural ecosystem that had developed over 1,000 years in England. It relied on established markets, specialized farms, and complex supply chains. You have none of that. You are starting from scratch, in an alien environment. Your choices were dictated by what was portable, what was non-perishable, and what was calorically dense. Sheep could be walked to your remote section of land. Potatoes were easy to grow and stored reasonably well in a pit dug into the earth. Tea, sugar, and salt were dry goods that could survive the 6-month sea voyage and be bought from the rudimentary settlement store. These weren't culinary choices, they were strategic ones. The goal was to import a functioning agricultural system, and that meant starting with the hardiest, most reliable components. There was no room for sentiment or variety. Every calorie had to be fought for, and the most efficient way to win that fight was to focus on the things that were least likely to fail. The dream of a varied table, of fresh vegetables and orchard fruits, was a distant luxury. First, you had to establish the bland, boring, but reliable foundation. Your monotonous diet was the taste of survival itself. And as you sit on a stump, forcing down another mouthful of stringy mutton, you might glance towards your smoky hut and think of the person who is supposed to make this crude existence a home, your wife. In the grand, carefully constructed narrative of colonial settlement, the role of a wife was crystal clear. She was to be the angel in the house, a concept imported wholesale from Victorian England. Promotional pamphlets and official rhetoric depicted her as a civilizing force, a gentle domestic presence who would transform your crude hut into a proper Christian home. Her domain was the interior. She would bring cleanliness, order, and piety to the wilderness. Her hands, it was implied, would be busy with delicate tasks, sewing fine seams, arranging the few precious heirlooms you brought from home, perhaps tending a small, neat flower garden to remind you of England. The glamorous illusion was that while you, the man, tames the savage land outside, she would cultivate a serene, feminine sanctuary inside. She was the keeper of culture, the soft counterpoint to your rugged, masculine toil. Her presence was supposed to be a constant, gentle reminder of the refined society you were striving to build. The shocking reality lands with the force of a felled tree. Your wife arrives, perhaps on a later boat, her face pale from the voyage, her best dress already splattered with the same mud that welcomed you. She takes one look at the smoky, leaking hut, the sea of mud outside, and the endless, dark wall of the bush, and any illusions she may have harbored are instantly shattered. There is no domestic sphere here, no gentle interior world separate from the harsh reality outside. The inside and the outside are one and the same, a constant battle against dirt, damp, and decay. Hands are not destined for fine needlework. Within weeks, they are chapped, calloused, and muscular, often stronger and more resilient than your own. Her work is not a gentle counterpart to yours, it is a different, but equally grueling, circle of hell. Her day begins before sunrise. It is her job to coax the fire back to life from the embers, to boil the day's first billy of tea. She then prepares your breakfast of mutton and potatoes. While you go out to battle the stumps in the forest, her labour begins in earnest. She has to haul the water, bucket by heavy bucket, from the stream at the bottom of the gully. The steep, slippery path is a daily trial. She does the laundry, which means scrubbing your mud-caked, sweat-stiffened work clothes in a tub of cold water with harsh, lye-based soap that eats away at her skin. She hangs it on a line made of flax, praying for a rare day of sun and wind, knowing full well that a sudden shower will undo all her work and the clothes will end up smelling of that pervasive, mildewy damp. She is the one who is to make the monotonous food palatable, who tends the struggling vegetable patch, who mends your torn clothes by the flickering, smoky firelight until her eyes ache. She also becomes a farmhand. When you are clearing a new patch of ground, she is there beside you, dragging branches, pulling at roots, her face smudged with soot and dirt. When you finally acquire a dairy cow, a creature of immense value, it is she who rises in the pre-dawn cold to do the milking, her fingers numb against the cow's warm udder. She is the one who churns the butter, a task that takes hours of rhythmic, exhausting work, her arms and back screaming with the effort. You might see her with a rifle in her hands, shooting at the parrots and other birds that try to decimate your tiny crop of wheat. The hands are not soft. They are covered in cuts, blisters, and burns. They are plunged in icy water, then greasy mutton fat, then dirt. They smell perpetually of soap, smoke, and soil. The shocking truth is that the angel in the house is a myth. The pioneer woman is a beast of burden, a tireless, all-purpose labourer whose work is never, ever done. So why persist with this transparently false illusion of the gentle civilizer? Because the entire colonial project was built on the foundation of the family unit. To attract stable, respectable settlers, the kind who would put down roots and build a community, rather than transient single men who might leave at the first sign of trouble, they had to appeal to women. They couldn't advertise for a life of back-breaking, spirit-crushing toil. They had to sell the dream of being a respected mistress of a new household, the co-founder of a prosperous family dynasty. The illusion of the domestic sphere was a crucial piece of marketing. Furthermore, this ideology provided a powerful psychological framework. By framing the woman's role as one of civilizing and refining, it elevated her endless drudgery into a noble, patriotic duty. It disguised the raw exploitation of her labour as a moral calling. It was a way for society, and perhaps for the women themselves, to cope with a reality that was otherwise too bleak to bear. Her work wasn't just about survival, it was about building a better world, one scrubbed floor and mended shirt at a time. The myth wasn't for her, it was for the good of the colony. And as she lies down at night, the damp seeping into her aching bones, she might pray not just for her own strength, but for the health of her family, knowing that in this isolated world, a simple sickness could be a death sentence. The advertisements and letters home were always full of it, the promise of vigorous, robust health. This was a core tenet of the colonial dream. In the grimy, overcrowded cities of industrial Britain, disease was rampant. Cholera, typhoid, consumption, they were the background noise of life, thriving in the smoke-filled air and polluted water. New Zealand, by contrast, was sold as a natural sanatorium. The glamorous illusion was of a land so pure, so untouched, that sickness itself could barely survive there. You would breathe in the clean, salt-tinged air, drink water straight from pristine mountain streams, and work your body into a state of hardy perfection under a benevolent sun. Children would grow up with rosy cheeks and strong limbs, free from the smog and squalor of the old world. The idea was that the land itself was a tonic, a guarantee of a long and healthy life. You weren't just emigrating to a new country, you were emigrating to a new state of being, one of perpetual, vibrant well-being. The shocking reality arrives with your first serious injury. You are chopping wood. A daily chore. Your mind wanders for a second. You're tired. The axe is heavy. It slips. The blade glances off the log and slices deep into your shin. Pain is sharp and sickening. You look down and see the blood, shockingly red, welling up from a deep, gaping wound. In England, this would be a problem, but a manageable one. You would go to a doctor, get it cleaned, stitched, and bandaged. Here, there is no doctor. The nearest one is a day's journey away. A journey you cannot possibly make with a leg like this. Your wife becomes your surgeon. She cleans the wound as best she can with boiled water and a clean rag, her hands shaking. There are no stitches. She binds it tightly with strips of torn linen, but it's a crude, clumsy dressing. Now, a new fear sets in, one more terrifying than the pain, the fear of infection. In this world of mud, damp, and dirt, a clean wound is an impossibility. Every surface teems with invisible threats. Remember the smell of damp rot, of decay? That is the smell of bacteria, of fungus, of the very agents of infection. Within 2 days, your leg is hot, swollen, and throbbing with a relentless agony. Red streaks begin to snake their way up your skin from the wound. You have fever, and you drift in and out of a delirious state, shivering uncontrollably in your smoky hut. There are no antiseptics, no antibiotics. The pure air of New Zealand does nothing to stop the bacteria breeding in your flesh. Your wife resorts to folk remedies, poultices made of boiled leaves or bread and milk, desperate measures that do little more than add to the mess. Your robust health, the supposed gift of this new land, has evaporated. You are now locked in a solitary, desperate struggle for your life against an invisible enemy, with nothing but your own constitution to aid you. Common ailments become life or death dramas. A toothache, a minor nuisance in London, becomes a source of chronic, untreatable pain that can drive a person mad. The only cure is extraction, performed by a neighbour with a pair of pliers and a bottle of rum for anaesthetic. The child's fever, a simple flu, becomes a terrifying vigil as parents sit helpless, watching and praying, with no medicine to offer. Childbirth, always a risk, is doubly so in these isolated huts. A midwife might be available, a neighbour with some experience, but if anything goes wrong, if the baby is breech or the mother hemorrhages, there is simply nothing to be done. The shocking reality is that the healthy country life was, in fact, a medical desert. The purity of the environment was meaningless without the knowledge and tools to combat basic injuries and infections. The isolation that was supposed to promote peace of mind became a source of extreme psychological stress, where every cough, every cut, every stomach cramp could be the start of a fatal ordeal. So why was this glaring danger so completely glossed over in the promotional material? Because the architects of colonization were focused on the macro, not the micro. Their concern was public health on a mass scale. From their perspective, moving a population from the polluted, epidemic-ridden slums of Britain to the wide open spaces of New Zealand was a massive public health victory. They were trading the certainty of mass deaths from diseases like cholera and typhoid for the statistical probability of individual deaths from accident and isolation. On a balance sheet of lives, it looked like a good deal. The lack of doctors and hospitals was not an oversight. It was an accepted feature of early settlement. Services follow population density and the accumulation of wealth. In the initial phase, settlers were expected to be self-reliant. The myth of the healthy country served a dual purpose. It was a powerful marketing tool, assuaging one of the biggest fears of potential emigrants. It also created a mindset. By telling you the land would keep you healthy, it placed the responsibility for your well-being squarely on your own shoulders. If you got sick, it was a matter of bad luck or perhaps personal weakness, not a systemic failure of the colonial project. The promise of health was a way of deflecting from the terrifying lack of help. And as you lie sweating in your bunk, your leg a ball of fire, you begin to understand the true meaning of isolation, realizing that your nearest neighbor, a potential source of aid, feels a world away. The promise of community was a cornerstone of the entire colonial enterprise. You didn't just buy a plot of land, you bought into a parish, a township, a new society. The pamphlets and official documents were filled with warm, inviting images of a neighborly, tight-knit community. You pictured cheerful gatherings, church socials on a Sunday, and barn raisings where the whole district would come together in a spirit of mutual cooperation. Imagined evenings spent in a cozy pub, sharing a pint and swapping stories with fellow farmers. This glamorous illusion depicted a ready-made social life, a seamless transfer of the best aspects of English village life to a new, more prosperous setting. It was a powerful antidote to the fear of loneliness, a promise that you would not be facing this new world by yourself. You would be part of a team, a fellowship of pioneers building a better future together. The shocking reality is a silence so profound it feels like a physical weight. Your nearest neighbor is 2 miles away. 2 miles of that same tangled, treacherous bush you hacked your way through to find your own land. There is no road, only a faint, muddy track that is impassable after heavy rain. A visit is not a casual affair. It is a planned expedition. To see another human face, to have a conversation with someone other than your wife, requires a significant investment of time and energy. Consequently, you might go for weeks, even months, without seeing another soul. The silence is broken only by the wind sighing in the trees, the maddening drip of water, and the strange, unsettling calls of birds you do not recognize. Loneliness is an ever-present ache, a psychological pressure that can be as debilitating as any physical hardship. When a visitor does appear, it is a monumental event, but not in the way you imagined. A lone figure emerging from the bush is a cause for both excitement and alarm. Your heart leaps at the prospect of news from the settlement, of human contact. But it is also a tremendous disruption. Your meager store of food must now be stretched to accommodate another person. The carefully managed routine of your day is thrown into chaos. Hospitality is an ironclad rule of the bush. You must offer what you have, but doing so can be a genuine sacrifice. You might slaughter a precious chicken you were saving for a special occasion, or open your last tin of biscuits. Visitor brings the outside world in, but they also consume your scarce resources, and the social gatherings you dreamed of. They are rare and fraught with logistical challenges. A trip to the distant, embryonic town, a collection of a few wooden buildings around a muddy track, is an all-day affair. You must prepare for it, dress in your good clothes that always feel slightly damp and smell of wood smoke, and then endure the long, arduous journey. When you get there, the interactions can be stiff and awkward. After weeks of solitude, the art of casual conversation feels foreign. The men talk of practical matters, the price of wool, the best way to deal with tree roots, the endless, maddening rain. The women huddle together, exchanging news of births and sicknesses, their faces etched with a wariness that mirrors your wife's. There is a sense of shared hardship, yes, but also a palpable sense of competition and anxiety. Everyone is struggling. Everyone is measuring their own progress against their neighbors. Cheerful, relaxed community of the pamphlets is nowhere to be found. In its place is a collection of isolated, struggling families, bound together not by joyous socializing, but by a shared, unspoken desperation. The shocking reality is that the tight-knit community is a mirage, and your primary relationship is not with your neighbors, but with the overwhelming, silent bush that separates you from them. Why was this reality of profound isolation so different from the promise? Because the settlement model was, at its core, a paradox. The New Zealand Company's system, designed by Wakefield, sought to create a condensed version of English rural society. To do that, land had to be expensive enough to prevent labourers from immediately buying their own farms, thus creating a working class. But to tempt the right sort of moneyed settlers, they also had to offer substantial plots of land, 40, 50, 100 acres. The result was a dispersed settlement pattern. Your 40-acre rectangle and your neighbour's 40-acre rectangle and his neighbour's after that inevitably created huge distances between homesteads. The very system designed to replicate the social density of an English village created the exact opposite, a landscape of isolated farmsteads, each an island in a sea of green. The community was supposed to grow organically over time, as the land was cleared and roads were built. But in the early years, that was just a theory. Reality was the tyranny of distance. The promise of community was not a lie, exactly, but a statement of future intent. The promoters were selling the blueprint, not the finished building. They were confident that community would eventually coalesce, but they neglected to mention the years of crushing loneliness and silence that would come first. And in that silence, you turn your attention back to the most immediate and all-consuming task, the war against the trees. The act of clearing the land was presented as a heroic, almost biblical, struggle. In paintings, prints, and stirring newspaper accounts from the time, you see the pioneer farmer, sleeves rolled up, axe in hand, standing triumphantly over a fallen giant. The forest is portrayed as a dark, malevolent dragon, and you are St. George, bringing the light of civilization into the darkness. The felling of each tree is a victory, the transformation of waste land into productive pasture a noble and righteous cause. This is the glamorous illusion of the conquest of nature. It's a story of progress, of improvement, of man imposing his will upon a chaotic wilderness and creating order and prosperity. The sound of the axe and the sight of smoke on the horizon were framed as the very symbols of a new nation being born. You are not just a farmer clearing a field, you are a soldier on the front line of progress. The shocking reality of this noble conquest is a season of hell known as the burn. Clearing the forest with an axe and a saw alone is an impossibly slow process. To turn the tide, you must use fire. After months of back-breaking work felling the trees on a few acres of your land, you wait. You wait for the driest part of the summer, for a period of hot, windy weather. This is a terrifying gamble. Too wet, and the burn will fail, leaving you with a blackened, half-burned mess that is even harder to clear than the original forest. Too dry, and you risk unleashing an uncontrollable inferno. On the chosen day, you go to the upwind edge of your felled section, a torch in your hand. Your heart is pounding. You touch the flame to the dry leaves and dead branches. A moment, nothing happens. Then, with a sudden, explosive whoosh, the fire takes hold. It is not a gentle, controlled burn. It is an apocalypse in miniature. A wall of flame, 20, 30 feet high, roars through the felled timber. The sound is a deafening, continuous crackle and roar, punctuated by the sharp reports of exploding seed pods and the groaning crash of burning trunks giving way. The heat is so intense it scurries the leaves on the living trees at the edge of the clearing, 100 feet away. The air fills with a thick, choking black smoke that blots out the sun, turning midday into a terrifying, orange-lit twilight. Ash and burning embers rain down, stinging your skin and setting fire to your clothes. You are not a triumphant conqueror. You are a tiny, insignificant creature cowering at the edge of a cataclysm you have deliberately unleashed. You watch in a state of primal terror, praying that the wind doesn't change, praying that the fire doesn't jump the crude break you tried to cut around the clearing, praying that it doesn't race towards your precious, flammable hut. When it is over, hours later, the scene is one of utter desolation. Your future pasture is a blackened, smoking wasteland. The ground is a sea of grey ash, hot enough to melt the soles of your boots. Skeletal, charcoal-blackened trunks lie everywhere like the bones of slain monsters. The air is thick with the sickeningly sweet smell of burnt sap and cooked earth, a scent that will cling to the back of your throat for weeks. And it is not over. Days, even weeks, the ground will smoulder. Roots deep underground can burn for a month, collapsing into fiery pits without warning. And the giant, immovable stumps you remember. They are still there, charred and blackened, but just as immovable. The burn hasn't cleared the land, it has just transformed the battlefield. Now begins the logging up, the grim, filthy work of gathering the unburnt logs into piles for a second, smaller burn and the endless, hopeless-feeling task of trying to grub out the stumps and roots. The heroic image of the pioneer is replaced by the reality of a man, black with soot from head to toe, his eyes red and streaming, his lungs raw, working in a landscape of smoke, ash and death. It is a brutal, destructive, and often fatal process. Men were frequently caught in the flames, or killed by falling, half-burnt trees. The conquest of the forest was not noble. It was a dirty, dangerous, and terrifying war of attrition. So why was this destructive reality portrayed in such heroic terms? Because the ideology of improvement was fundamental to the entire colonial justification. The British and European settlers in general did not see the primeval New Zealand bush as a valuable ecosystem. They saw it as unproductive wasteland. In their worldview, land that was not being actively used for agriculture or industry in the European style was literally worthless. The forest was not a home for unique flora and fauna, it was an obstacle to profit, a challenge to be overcome. Therefore, destroying it was not an act of vandalism, it was a moral and economic imperative. To improve the land was to make it useful, and useful meant turning it into a pale imitation of the English countryside. The heroic narrative was essential propaganda, transformed an act of brutal ecological destruction into a celebrated national myth. It allowed the settlers to see themselves as creators, not destroyers. By framing the burn as a noble battle, it masked the terrifying, chaotic, and deeply scouring reality of what was actually being done to the land and to the men who were forced to do it. The cost of a green pasture was a field of black stumps and a sky full of smoke. And once you had a small patch of this tortured ground cleared, you faced the next great challenge: how to pay for it all. The ultimate prize, the reason you endured the voyage, the hut, the mud, and the fire, was the promise of independence. Specifically, financial independence. In Britain, the land was owned by a small, entrenched aristocracy. A man like you could work the land his entire life and never have a hope of owning it. New Zealand was meant to break that cycle. The glamorous illusion was that by purchasing your own plot, you would become your own master. You would be a yeoman farmer, that celebrated, almost mythical figure who is beholden to no one. Your hard work would translate directly into prosperity. The farm would provide for your family, and any surplus could be sold, allowing you to save money, buy more land, and build a comfortable, secure future. It was a vision of a life free from landlords, free from bosses, and, most importantly, free from the crushing, spirit-breaking burden of debt. You were not just buying land, you were buying sovereignty over your own life. The shocking reality is that you have simply traded one master for another. You have escaped the landlord in England only to be ensnared by the local storekeeper or the stock and station agent in the new settlement. Your initial capital, the money you brought with you, runs out with terrifying speed. You paid for your passage, for the land itself, for your initial tools, for your first few sheep. Now you are land rich but cash poor, and everything you need to turn your patch of smouldering wasteland into a functioning farm costs money. You need grass seed, fencing wire, more livestock, a plough, a decent axe, maybe even a horse. You need flour, sugar, salt, and tea to survive until your first proper harvest, which could be years away. There is only one place to get these things: the local merchant's store. So you go to him, app in hand. He is a shrewd, patient man who has seen hundreds like you before. He agrees to extend you a line of credit. He will give you the supplies you need on tick. You don't sign a formal contract. It's all recorded in his ledger, a thick, leather-bound book that becomes the true record of your life. Every bag of seed, every coil of wire, every pound of sugar is noted down next to your name, with the price he sets, and the interest starts to accumulate. The merchant is not just a shopkeeper. He is the bank, the supplier, and the sole purchaser of your goods, all rolled into one. When you finally have something to sell, a few bags of wool, a side of bacon, some potatoes, you have no choice but to sell it to him. There is no other market. And he, of course, sets the price. He buys low and sells high. He subtracts what you owe him from your earnings, and it is never, ever enough. You always leave his store with a few goods, but with your name still firmly in his ledger. You are trapped. You are working not for yourself, but for him. The dream of independence has become a nightmare of perpetual servitude. Every swing of the axe, every drop of sweat, is ultimately for the benefit of the man behind the counter. He owns your labor as surely as if you were his indentured servant. The psychological toll is immense. You live with a constant, low-grade anxiety, a knot of dread in your stomach. The ledger book haunts your dreams. You are terrified of a bad season, of a sheep dying, of anything that might push you further into the red. You have become secretive and suspicious, wary of your neighbors, seeing them as competitors for the merchant's limited favour. The shocking reality is that the promise of a debt-free life was a cruel joke. For most small farmers, the 19th century New Zealand experience was defined not by freedom, but by a suffocating, inescapable web of debt that dictated every aspect of their existence. The independent yeoman was a phantom. The reality was the debt peon. Why did this system of virtual serfdom emerge so quickly in a land that promised the opposite? It was the inevitable result of a cash-poor, capital-intensive enterprise. The colonial project required immense upfront investment. Land had to be cleared, fenced, and stocked long before it could generate any income. The settlers, by and large, did not have the capital to finance this themselves. The merchant, or more formally, the stock and station agencies, filled this vacuum. These were powerful companies, often financed by British capital, that essentially bankrolled the entire pastoral industry. They created a closed economic loop where they controlled both supply and demand. It was a brilliant business model for them, guaranteeing profits at every stage of the process. For the individual farmer, it was a trap. The system was not designed for your rapid success. It was designed to keep you productive, compliant, and perpetually dependent. A farmer who paid off his debts and became truly independent was a lost customer. A farmer who was always struggling, always needing more credit, was a customer for life. The promise of freedom was the bait. The reality of the ledger book was the hook. And this pressure to produce, to somehow get ahead, fell not just on you, but on every single member of your family, including the very youngest. The vision of childhood in the new colony was one of rustic, rosy-cheeked innocence. It was a powerful part of the sales pitch, an appeal to the deep-seated Victorian ideal of childhood as a sacred, protected state. In illustrations and sentimental poetry, the children of settlers were depicted as cherubs in nature's playground. You imagined your future sons and daughters running freely through sunny, flower-filled meadows, their laughter echoing in the clean, fresh air. They would grow up strong and healthy, their characters shaped by the wholesome influence of the natural world, far from the corrupting grime and vice of the city. The glamorous illusion was that you were giving your children the gift of a perfect, carefree youth, a paradise where they could simply be children. They were not just a consequence of your new life, they were one of its primary rewards. Shocking reality is that your children are not cherubs in a playground, they are essential, unpaid farm labourers from the moment they can walk. The concept of a carefree childhood is a luxury you cannot afford. There is simply too much work to be done. A child is not another mouth to feed, it is another pair of hands to put to work. Their education comes not from books, but from the relentless demands of the farm. The toddler, as soon as they are steady on their feet, is given tasks. They can be set to scaring birds away from the precious vegetable patch or to collecting firewood, picking up small sticks and twigs and carrying them back to the hut. A 5-year-old is old enough to be useful. They learn to fetch and carry, to weed the garden, to feed the chickens. They learn to watch for the telltale signs of a lost sheep. By the age of 8 or 9, a boy is expected to work alongside you. He learns to use an axe, to milk the cow, to help with the brutal, messy business of slaughtering. He is not helping in the modern sense. He is a vital part of the workforce. His small hands are useful for reaching into machinery to clear jams, a dangerous but necessary task. A girl of the same age works alongside her mother, her day a miniature version of that endless cycle of drudgery. She learns to haul water, to scrub clothes, to cook, to churn butter, to care for her younger siblings. She might be responsible for the entire dairy operation, the milking, the separating of cream, the cleaning of the equipment before she is even a teenager. Schooling is a distant dream. The nearest school might be 10 miles away, an impossible daily journey. Even if there were a school, you could not spare them. Taking a child out of the workforce for a day of learning is a direct economic loss. The farm is a dangerous place. There are no safety guards on the primitive machinery, no child-proof caps on toxic substances. Children fall into open fires, are kicked by horses, or cut themselves badly with farm tools. The same isolation that makes a simple cut a life-threatening event for you is doubly true for them. Many children do not survive to adulthood. They succumb to accidents or to the diseases that sweep through the isolated communities with devastating effect. The shocking reality is that childhood is not a protected state, but a harsh apprenticeship for a life of toil. Your children are not raised, they are trained. They are small, weary adults, their faces old before their time, their hands as calloused as your own. The carefree laughter you imagined is a rare sound, replaced by the quiet, diligent focus of a worker who knows their contribution is essential for the family's survival. So why was this grim reality masked by the idyllic myth of the country childhood? Because acknowledging the truth would have been morally and socially untenable. The Victorian era, for all its harshness, was the first to truly sentimentalize childhood. The idea that children were pure, innocent beings who needed to be nurtured and protected was a powerful cultural force. To admit that the colonial project was built on the systematic exploitation of child labor would have been to admit that the entire enterprise was morally compromised. The illusion of the rosy-cheeked cherub was a necessary fiction. It allowed the settlers, and the society that sent them, to reconcile their ideals with their actions. By framing the children's work as wholesome chores that built character, they could disguise the harsh economic necessity. It was a psychological defense mechanism. The children weren't being exploited, they were being given a practical, moral education in the virtues of hard work and self-reliance. This narrative transformed a grim reality into a positive virtue. It allowed everyone to sleep at night, convinced that they were building a better world for their children, even as the demands of that world were crushing their youth. And amidst this life of unceasing toil and filth, you still cling to one small, increasingly absurd symbol of the civilization you left behind, your Sunday best. Packed carefully at the bottom of your sea chest, protected by layers of linen, is your connection to respectability. It is your Sunday best. For you, it's a dark wool suit, perhaps a little tight in the shoulders, now from months of swinging an axe. It includes a stiffly starched collar, a silk cravat, and a pair of polished leather boots that have never touched the mud of your farm. For your wife, it is a dress of dark, rustling taffeta or bombazine, with a delicate lace collar and a bonnet trimmed with a precious silk ribbon. These are not mere clothes. They are costumes. They are the glamorous illusion of civility, a tangible link to the formal, ordered world you left behind. The idea is that by putting on these clothes once a week or for a rare trip to the settlement, you reaffirm your status. You are not a savage, not a mere labourer grubbing in the dirt. You are a respectable, church-going, British subject. The clothes are a statement of aspiration, a promise to yourself and to the world that the dirt and the damp and the smoke have not defeated you. They represent order, cleanliness, and social standing in a world that constantly threatens to overwhelm you with chaos. The shocking reality of these clothes is the monumental effort and the utter absurdity of maintaining them in your current conditions. Consider laundry day. You remember your wife's grueling work, scrubbing the filthy, mud-caked work clothes in cold water with harsh soap. Now imagine her trying to launder your starched white shirt or her dress with its delicate lace. It's an almost impossible task. The water from the stream is full of silt. The soap is caustic and yellow. There is no starch. She might try to create some by boiling potato water, a messy, unreliable process. There is no proper iron. Only a Sadarona heavy wedge of cast iron that must be heated in the smoky fire. It's impossible to keep the soot from the fire off the iron, and from the iron off your precious white shirt. More often than not, the attempt to clean a respectable garment results in a new set of greyish streaks and scorch marks. The whole process is a weekly exercise in frustration, a battle that is almost always lost. So, you learn to cheat. The starched collar isn't washed every time, but wiped down and worn again and again, until the grime around the neck becomes a permanent feature. The dark wool of your suit is a blessing, as it hides the dirt well. You brush it vigorously, hoping to dislodge the worst of the dust and ash. Your wife's dress is an even greater challenge. It cannot be easily washed. She airs it out, hoping to diminish the pervasive scent of wood smoke that clings to every fibre. Remember that deep, ever-present smell of damp earth and rot? It permeates everything, even your best clothes. When you put them on, they feel subtly, unpleasantly clammy. The fabric, which should feel crisp and formal, has a limp, defeated quality. Wearing them is not a comfortable experience. The suit is constricting. The collar chokes you. The dress is heavy and hot. After months of wearing loose, practical work clothes, dressing up feels like being put in a straitjacket. The most shocking reality is the contrast. You stand there, you and your family, dressed in your Sunday best for a rare photograph or a visit to a neighbour. From a distance, you might almost pass for a respectable English family. But up close, the truth is visible. Frayed cuffs, the faint but indelible stains, the weary, weather-beaten faces above the stiff collars. And the boots. The pristine boots are carried on the long walk through the mud and put on only at the very last moment, at the edge of the settlement or the churchyard. For the journey, you wear your work boots or even walk barefoot. The entire performance is a carefully stage-managed lie. You are not people who live in these clothes, you are people who briefly inhabit them, like actors in a play, before returning to your real lives of dirt and grime. The illusion is a thin, fragile veneer over a much harsher truth. Why go to all this trouble? Why cling so fiercely to this exhausting and often ridiculous ritual? Because in a society attempting to rebuild itself in the British image, appearances were everything. Your Sunday best was your uniform in the army of respectability. It was a visual signal to your neighbours, to the merchant, to the parson, that you were upholding the standards of the mother country. It was a way of enforcing social hierarchies. A man in a suit was treated with more respect than a man in muddy work trousers. It was a tool for self-preservation. In a world where you could so easily lose everything, maintaining the outward symbols of success felt like a way of holding failure at bay. It was an act of defiance. Every time you put on those uncomfortable clothes, you were making a statement. I have not been beaten. I am still civilized. The ritual was a psychological anchor, a way to impose a tiny sliver of predictable, man-made order onto an overwhelmingly chaotic natural world. It was a reminder of who you were supposed to be, even if the daily reality was something else entirely. And as you stand stiffly in your suit, you might find your mind drifting, noticing not the conversations around you, but the sounds of the profound lack of them that define your new world. When you first thought of leaving England, the idea of escaping the noise was a powerful lure. You were tired of the constant clatter of iron-shod wheels on cobblestones, the rumble of factory machinery, the shouts of street vendors, the perpetual, grimy hum of a million people living on top of each other. The New Zealand you imagined was a place of peace and quiet. The glamorous illusion was of a gentle, soothing soundscape. You pictured yourself listening to the tranquil bleating of sheep on a distant hill, the cheerful chirping of familiar songbirds in the hedgerows, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was a vision of auditory peace, a peaceable kingdom where the sounds were natural, harmonious, and calming. Sonic tranquility was part of the promise of a less stressful, more contemplative life, a world where you could finally hear yourself think. The shocking reality is the silence. And it is not a peaceful silence. It is a crushing, absolute, and deeply unnerving void of sound that presses in on you from all sides. When you stop working, when the rhythmic thud of your axe ceases, the silence that rushes in to fill the vacuum is immense and terrifying. There are no familiar sounds. No distant church bells, no rumbling carts, no barking of a neighbour's dog. Nothing. Just a vast, empty stillness that seems to absorb all noise. It makes the small sounds that do exist, the drip of water from a fern frond, the scuttling of an insect in the leaf litter, shockingly loud and distinct. You find yourself straining your ears, listening for something, anything, and the lack of it is a form of psychological torture. The birdsong you expected is completely alien. Don't hear the cheerful chirp of the English robin or the melodious song of the blackbird. Instead, you hear sounds that are jarring and strange. The morning is heralded by the loud, dissonant call of the a bird whose song is a bizarre and unpredictable mix of clicks, gurgles, whistles, and coughs. It doesn't sound like a bird, it sounds like a machine breaking down. At night, you are startled awake by the shrill, piercing shriek of the ruru, the native owl, or the eerie, two-note call of the wicker, which sounds like a rusty gate hinge. These are not the gentle, comforting sounds of home. They are the sounds of a foreign world, and they only serve to amplify your sense of dislocation and loneliness. They don't fill the silence, they punctuate it with moments of strangeness. And then there is the wind. It is your most constant auditory companion. But it doesn't whisper gently through familiar deciduous trees. It howls and moans through the dense, leathery leaves of the native bush. It creates a vast, monotonous and mournful sighing sound that can go on for days without end. It's a lonely, desolate sound that seems to speak of immense, empty spaces. It gets inside your head, a constant reminder of your isolation. The shocking reality is that the peaceful soundscape of New Zealand is a complex mix of unnerving alien noises and a profound, crushing silence. It is not calming, it is anxiety-inducing. It's a silence that makes you feel small and insignificant, a silence that allows your own worried thoughts to grow louder and louder until they are all you can hear. That deep, pervasive scent of damp and rot now has a soundtrack, the sighing of the wind and the unsettling squawk of an unknown bird. Why was this auditory reality never mentioned? Why the focus on a non-existent peace and quiet? Because sound is one of the most fundamental, yet subconscious, elements of our sense of place. The familiar sounds of home are a huge part of what makes us feel safe and grounded. The promoters of colonization understood this on an intuitive level. To describe the real soundscape of the New Zealand bush would have been to admit how truly alien the place was. It would have been like trying to sell a house by mentioning that it's haunted. The peace and quiet they advertised was a generic, idealized concept of rural life, not an accurate description of the destination. They were selling an escape from the noise of Britain, and the simplest way to do that was to promise its opposite, tranquility. The subtle, psychological terror of an alien silence was not a good marketing point. Furthermore, the settlers themselves were part of the problem. The goal of the improvement ideology was to replace the native soundscape with a familiar one. The bleating of sheep, the lowing of cattle, the ringing of an axe, the eventual chime of a church bell, these were the sounds of progress. The silence and the strange bird calls were the sounds of the wilderness that needed to be tamed. The goal was to conquer the silence, to fill it with the familiar, comforting noises of an English farm. The unsettling quiet was just another temporary hardship to be endured, another enemy to be defeated in the grand project of recreating a society that looked, felt, and sounded just like the one you had left behind, complete with all its invisible rules and structures. One of the most seductive promises of a new colony like New Zealand was the idea of a classless society. This was the ultimate escape. Not just from mud or poverty, but from the invisible, soul-crushing cage of the British class system. In England, the circumstances of your birth determined your entire life. Your accent, your manners, your education or lack thereof marked you for life. You knew your place, and you were expected to stay in it. The glamorous illusion of colonial life was that all of that would be washed away by the long sea voyage. On the new frontier, a man would be judged not by his ancestry, but by his actions. Hard work, grit, and resourcefulness would be the sole measures of a person's worth. Labourers could become landowners, and everyone would meet as equals, united in the common cause of building a new nation. It was a powerful, quasi-republican dream of a true meritocracy. The shocking reality is that the British class system was not left behind at the docks in London. It was packed up as carefully as the Sunday best and the family silver and painstakingly reassembled on the muddy shores of New Zealand. The ink was barely dry on the Treaty of Waitangi before the lines of social demarcation began to be drawn. The New Zealand Company's settlement plan, masterminded by Wakefield, was explicitly designed to prevent a classless society from forming. The whole point of setting a high price for land was to create a gentry, a class of wealthy capitalist settlers and a corresponding labouring class to work for them. The project was not to dismantle the class structure, but to transplant it into more fertile soil. You see it immediately in the layout of the fledgling settlements. The gentry, the lawyers, doctors, and wealthy farmers with capital are allocated the best, flattest, most accessible land near the nascent town centre. They build large, wooden houses with verandas and multiple rooms, crude imitations of English villas. You and your fellow smallholders are relegated to the remote, hilly, marginal land, the very land that requires the most back-breaking labour to tame. A rigid social geography is established from day one. When you go into the settlement, you feel the old deference creeping back into your posture. You might tip your hat to a man like Mr. Beecher or Mr. Molesworth, not just because he is wealthy, but because he carries himself with an air of innate authority. He is a gentleman, and you, despite now being a landowner, are still a farmer. The distinction is subtle, but absolute. Class lines are policed in countless small ways. Accents are a major signifier. A man with a received pronunciation accent is listened to in the merchant's store, while your regional burr is treated with condescension. The way you hold your fork, the topics of conversation you are familiar with, the clothes you wear, all of these are markers. Remember that desperate effort to maintain your Sunday best. That was part of this unspoken war. The gentry form their own exclusive social circles. They establish clubs, a gentleman's club, a jockey club from which you are implicitly excluded. Their wives hold teas and at homes to which your wife is not invited. Children are sent to private tutors or exclusive small schools, while yours are put to work. The shocking reality is that the dream of egalitarianism was a lie. You have travelled halfway around the world only to find yourself at the bottom of the same social pyramid, its foundations now rebuilt with Tatara logs and colonial ambition. So why cling to the myth of a classless society? For the colonial promoters, it was a vital recruitment tool. The dream of social mobility was perhaps the single most powerful motivator for the working and lower middle classes of Britain. They had to sell the possibility of rising, even if they were secretly structuring the society to make it difficult. For the colonial gentry themselves, the myth was a convenient way to justify their privileged position. They could claim that their success was due to their superior character and work ethic, rather than the immense advantages of the capital they brought with them. It allowed them to maintain a sense of moral superiority while recreating a system of profound inequality. It was a classic case of rules for thee, but not for me. The ideology of a fresh start and a level playing field was the public face of a project that was, in private, deeply conservative. Its aim was not to create a radical new society, but to create a better Britain, which, for those at the top, meant a Britain where their own class was still firmly in charge. And one of the most visible ways they asserted their cultural dominance was by improving the very landscape, not just by clearing it, but by filling it with the familiar plants and animals of home. The drive to improve the land wasn't just about clearing the native bush for pasture. It was also about making this strange, alien landscape feel more like home. Key part of this was the process of acclimatization. The glamorous illusion was a work of pure, nostalgic artistry. The settlers dreamed of a New Zealand remade in England's image. They pictured meadows full of skylarks, their songs cascading from the blue sky. They imagined streams teeming with brown trout, offering the gentle sport of angling on a summer's evening. They envisioned forests where the cheerful chatter of songbirds replaced the strange, guttural calls of the native birds. The introduction of familiar animals and plants was framed as a noble, civilizing act. It was about enriching a supposedly impoverished ecosystem, bringing beauty, sport, and a touch of familiar comfort to a raw new land. Acclimatization societies were formed by the colonial gentry, and they spoke of their work in glowing, poetic terms, as if they were artists adding the final, perfect brushstrokes to a half-finished canvas. The shocking reality is that this nostalgic project unleashed an ecological catastrophe, a biological wildfire that swept across the country with terrifying speed. Become an unwilling soldier in a new war, a war against the very things you were told would bring comfort and familiarity. The first sign of trouble is the rabbits. They were introduced for sport and for a taste of home. But with no natural predators and an abundance of newly cleared land, their population explodes. They are not the cute, fluffy bunnies of children's stories. They are a grey, moving plague. They swarm across your precious pasture, their frantic nibbling cropping the grass down to the bare earth. They dig burrows that undermine the ground, causing erosion and creating hazards for your livestock. You spend countless hours and precious money on traps, poisons, and fences, but it's a losing battle. For every 100 you kill, 1,000 more seem to take their place. They are a relentless, eating, breeding machine that threatens your very livelihood. Then come the birds. The starlings, sparrows, and blackbirds, introduced to control insects and sing their cheerful songs, instead turn their attention to your small, struggling orchard and your vital grain crops. They descend in greedy flocks, stripping the fruit from the trees and pecking at the heads of wheat. The cheery songs become a maddening soundtrack to your economic ruin. And the plants. Gorse, brought from Britain to be a hardy, fast-growing hedge plant, escapes the neat lines of the fields. Its thorny, woody stems and aggressive roots take over the pasture you worked so hard to clear. It forms vast, impenetrable thickets, choking out the grass and making the land useless. It is highly flammable, creating a fire risk far greater than the native bush ever did. You spend your days hacking at it, burning it, but its seeds can lie dormant in the soil for decades, a permanent, prickly curse upon your land. Thistles, daisies, dandelions, all the familiar weeds of home arrive as stowaways in sacks of seed and thrive in the disturbed soil, outcompeting your crops. The enrichment of the ecosystem has become a full-blown invasion. You are fighting a multi-front war against an army of your own creation. Trout introduced into the streams have decimated the native fish populations. The stoats and weasels, brought in to control the rabbits, ignore their intended prey and instead slaughter the native birds, many of which are flightless and have no defense against these new, voracious predators. The shocking reality is that the attempt to turn New Zealand into a better Britain has created a broken, chaotic, and wildly unstable environment. The nostalgic dream has become an ecological nightmare and you are living in the middle of it, spending your days fighting plants and animals that were supposed to make you feel at home. Why did this happen? Why was such a disastrous course of action pursued with such vigor? It was born of a profound and arrogant ignorance. The 19th century settlers, even the educated gentlemen of the acclimatization societies, had almost no understanding of ecology. They did not see the world as a complex, interconnected web of life. They saw it as a collection of individual species. They believed that the native flora and fauna of New Zealand were inherently inferior, weaker, less vigorous and less useful than their European counterparts. They saw an empty niche and believed they could simply plug in a familiar species to fill it, like placing a piece in a jigsaw puzzle. They had no concept of how an animal without predators would behave or how a plant in a new climate could become a monstrous weed. This was not seen as a reckless gamble, but as a scientific and patriotic duty. They were improving nature itself, bringing it into line with a British ideal. The catastrophic results were not a failure of their good intentions, but a failure of their entire worldview. They saw the land as a passive canvas, not as a living, dynamic system with its own ancient rules. And now, after a lifetime spent fighting this war, first against the bush and then against the invaders, you might take a moment to look back at all you have wrought. After 30 or 40 years of this life, you stand on a small rise overlooking your farm. You are an old man now, your body a road map of the decades of toil. Your back is permanently bent, your hands are gnarled claws, and a hacking cough, a souvenir from your smoky hut, is your constant companion. But you have, by all outward measures, succeeded. The glamorous illusion is one of final, perfected triumph. Before you lies the very picture that was on the pamphlet all those years ago. The dark, menacing wall of the bush is gone, pushed back to the distant hills. In its place are rolling green pastures, neatly divided by fences of wire and stone. A flock of well-fed sheep grazes peacefully. Sturdy, whitewashed farmhouse with a tin roof has replaced the miserable hut. A stand of European trees oak, poplar and pinna grows near the house, providing familiar shade. Smoke rises from the chimney in a neat, civilized plume. You have done it. You have taken a piece of the wilderness and tamed it. You have imposed order, created prosperity, and built the better Britain you were promised. This is the culmination of a life's work, the final, satisfying image of a land perfected. But as you stand there, surveying your creation, the feeling is not one of simple, triumphant pride. Instead, a profound and unsettling sense of unease creeps in. The shocking reality is the hollowness of your victory. You look at your neat, green fields, and you remember the forest that was there before. You remember the towering rimu and tatara trees, their trunks covered in moss and ferns. You remember the cathedral-like silence under their canopy, a silence that once terrified you but which you now recall with a strange sense of nostalgia. You remember the scent of the damp earth, that rich, complex perfume of life and decay. Remember that smell. It's gone. The air now smells of grass, sheep, and manure. It is the smell of a farm, a familiar and productive smell, but it is thin and sterile compared to the deep, resonant perfume of the world you destroyed. You listen. The strange, challenging calls of the t and the weaker are gone. The silence of the bush has been replaced by the bleating of your sheep, the lowing of a cow, and the chirping of the English sparrows you now curse. The sounds are familiar, yes, but they are monotonous. The rich, bizarre, and sometimes frightening symphony of the old world has been silenced, and what replaced it feels simple and impoverished. You look at the stream at the bottom of the valley. It runs clear now, not brown and choked with leaves, but you know it is empty of the slippery, silver-bellied cocop you sometimes saw as a boy. The trout have seen to that. The entire landscape, for all its tidiness and productivity, feels strangely muted. It's like a painting that has been scrubbed too clean, its vibrant colours faded to pastel shades. The shocking reality is that in the process of taming the land, you have bleached it of its character. You have killed the very thing that made it unique. The world you have created is a passable imitation of England, but it is a pale copy, lacking the depth and history and spirit of the original. And it lacks the wild, powerful, and terrifying spirit of the land you first encountered. You came here to build a new world, but you have only succeeded in creating a watered-down version of the old one, and in doing so, you have erased a world that was ancient, complex, and in its own way perfect. This feeling is the final, most intimate secret of the pioneer. The sense of profound, unsettling loss that accompanies the victory. The quiet, gnawing grief for the very wilderness you spent your life fighting. Why this deep, unspoken melancholy? It is the price of improvement. The entire colonial project was based on the premise that the native environment of New Zealand was a blank slate, or worse, an obstacle. It had no intrinsic value. Its only worth was in its potential to be converted into something else, something European. For decades, this ideology sustained you. It gave your back-breaking labour a sense of higher purpose. You weren't just clearing land for yourself, you were advancing the cause of civilization. But now, at the end of your life, the fierce certainty of that ideology has begun to fade. You have seen the ecological consequences, the plagues of rabbits and gorse, the silencing of the birds, and you have lived long enough to develop a deep, subconscious connection to the land as it was. You have seen what was lost. The melancholy you feel is the slow, dawning realization that improvement and destruction were two sides of the same coin. You were told you were a creator, but you now suspect you were primarily a destroyer. Your success is undeniable, but its cost, a cost you can now finally begin to comprehend, feels immense. And so you stand there, an old man in your tamed and perfected landscape. The sun begins to set, casting long shadows across your green and orderly fields. The air grows cool, and you pull your coat a little tighter. It's time to go inside, to sit by the fire in the house you built. The day is done. The life is almost done. And as the quiet of the evening settles over your farm, a different kind of quiet from the one you first knew, the world begins to soften and fade at the edges. The story we have told tonight, my friends, is one of sharp contrasts and hard realities. But the work is over now. The axe is quiet, the fire in the hearth is burning low, and a deep stillness settles over the hills. The endless struggle gives way to a long-deserved rest. There is no more mud to fight, no more debt to worry about. There is only the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, a soft and steady presence in the quiet room. The world outside, with all its demands and its disappointments, can finally recede. Allow the edges of your own awareness to soften, just as the evening light softens the lines of the landscape. Let the tension in your shoulders and your jaw dissolve. Let it flow away into the darkness. There is nothing left to do now but rest. Feel the weight of your body, heavy and comfortable, sinking into your bed. Each breath is a quiet journey, in and out, a gentle tide pulling you further and further away from the waking world. The sounds around you, the hum of a fan or the distant quiet of the night, become part of a soothing lullaby, a gentle blanket of sound that covers you and keeps you safe. Let the last images of green pastures and setting suns fade into a soft, indistinct haze. You are drifting now on a calm and silent sea, towards the peaceful shores of deep and restorative sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.